I'm looking at a traditional Catholic website right now with an apologetic response about the global flood as recorded in Genesis. At the top of the webpage, this traditional Catholic organization says, question, why does the church teach that the flood was a global event? And then beneath that, it reads, without a doubt, the flood is always treated as a global event as taught by the church fathers. Wait a minute. That doesn't say church fathers. It says church leaders. Right here, as taught by church leaders. Well, that's a little bit of a weird way, right? Traditional Catholics don't often refer to church leaders. It's always church fathers, right? Who actually published this webpage anyway? Let me scroll down to the bottom. FAIR, Faithful Answers, Informed Response. FAIR is a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing well-documented answers to criticisms of the doctrine, practice, and history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Wait a minute. What's going on here? About a month ago, I had two very nice young missionaries from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints come to my front door. We chatted for close to an hour, and they asked if they could come back sometime soon. And I said, is tomorrow too soon? So sure enough, they came back the next day. We chatted for another hour, and they've actually been coming back about once a week since then. That was about a month ago. These meetings are still ongoing, and I have dived pretty deep into Mormon apologetics and counter-apologetics, Mormon scholarship, things like that, as I talk with my new friends from the LDS. And the more that I do this research and the more that I talk with my new friends from the LDS, the more that I realize that the LDS Church and the Catholic Church, in particular the traditional Catholic Church, actually have a lot in common. Let's talk about it. So there are a bunch of similarities, and I will only cover a couple of them today. And then I'll even mention some ways that they're not at all similar. And I am going to try to keep this video a little bit shorter than my recent videos, which have been more deeply researched and pretty long. So this should be a nice little change of pace. Okay, first, they share a decently literalist view of Scripture. Trad Catholics pretty much always... Well, I shouldn't say that because there is the FSSP, but Trad Catholics online anyway tend to reject evolution and embrace young earth creationism due to their literalist tendencies. I doubt I need to give an example, but I'll give two anyway. The first is a video from Avoiding Babylon, still the only Catholic channel that has banned me, and don't worry, I still love you, Rob and Anthony, and as soon as you take me back, I'm going to come running back with arms wide open. But they had Taylor Marshall on to talk about young earth creationism. And let me just play this clip. It gets kind of weird.
I kind of have this theory that before the flood, maybe those giants were actual giants and they maybe helped build maybe those temples were helped to be built by these giants. And then the flood comes and wipes everybody out and we start from scratch.
And then second, there's Kennedy Hall, of course, from the Kennedy Report. The Kennedy Report has a bunch of videos about how evolution is obviously wrong, and in one he even calls it a secretly ancient pagan idea. It's pretty weird.
Modern evolutionary theory, Lloyd will show us throughout the series why it's actually an ancient pagan idea that's basically just been co-opted. But anyway.
And it would appear that my new LDS missionary friends share in that biblical literalist view, since I think the Book of Mormon kind of paints them into a little bit of a corner. Let me explain what I mean. The Book of Mormon takes the flood kind of at face value. I've got my handy-dandy online copy of the Book of Mormon here that I am still in the middle of marking up with, my own kind of annotations. But one place where the Book of Mormon kind of paints Latter-day Saints into a corner with regard to the historicity of the global flood is in the Book of Alma, chapter 10. So if I scroll through to it's kind of like the Bible, right? Where it's, a whole bunch of different books. This is the Book of Mormon, by the way, which in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is just so Jews have the Old Testament, Christians have the Old Testament and the New Testament. Mormons have the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the Book of Mormon. So it's just kind of like a further evolution, I guess. And there's a book called the Book of Alma. And in Alma chapter 10, which is just going to take me a minute to, the context of Alma chapter 10 is that one of the prophets of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is giving he's preaching. And this prophet is preaching supposedly around like 82 BC. And this prophet is preaching words that are known to us through these golden plates, right? So we know that these are his actual words that he said because God told Joseph Smith that this is what he said. And you'll see here in Alma 10:22 that this prophet takes the flood pretty literally. The prophet says, "Yea, and I say unto you that if it were not for the prayers of the righteous who are now in the land, that ye would even now be visited with utter destruction. Yet it would not be by flood, as were the people in the days of Noah, but it would be by famine and by pestilence and by the sword." So this prophet is saying like, hey, look, that really did happen to Noah, and really bad stuff would happen to you if the righteous were not, praying and all that. And so this prophet in the book of Alma seems to be taking the Old Testament kind of at face value. And indeed, Joseph Smith took the Old Testament at face value. So it seems really difficult for somebody in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to take their religion as seriously as the more conservative types take it without thinking literally about the flood. Another thing that the Latter-day Saints, at least of the more conservative band, are kind of forced to take literally is the Tower of Babel. The Book of Ether, I might be pronouncing that wrong, is the record of the Jaredites taken from the 24 plates found by the people of Limhi in the days of King Mosiah. Again, the LDS Church paints itself into a little bit of a corner in terms of the historicity of their texts, right? The historicity of the Book of Mormon is painted out to be something that's far more literal than what Christians can get away with their texts, at least with the Old Testament texts, because of the way that Joseph Smith presented these documents. But anyway, the Book of Ether begins like this. So chapter 1, and then this script text that you see right here is kind of like a brief summary of what the chapter is going to say. So Moroni abridges the writings of Ether. Ether's genealogy is set forth. The language of the Jaredites is not confounded at the Tower of Babel. The Lord promised to lead them to a choice land and make them a great nation. Again, that choice land is the United States. But chapter 1 begins, "And now I, Moroni, proceed to give an account of those ancient inhabitants who were destroyed by the hand of the Lord upon the face of this north country. And I take mine account from the 24 plates which were found by the people of Limhi, which is called the Book of Ether. And as I suppose that the first part of this record, which speaks concerning the creation of the world and also of Adam, and an account from that time even to the great tower with that superscript B, and whatsoever things transpired among the children of men until that time, is had among the Jews. Therefore I do not write the things which transpired from the days of Adam until that time, but they are had upon the plates, and whoso findeth them, the same will have the power that he may get the full account." So as in, whoever finds the plates will find the story about Adam and Eve and the Tower of Babel, essentially what we have in Genesis. But if we take a look at, 3b, so verse 3b, we find Genesis chapter 11. And of course, Genesis chapter 11 is where we find the story of the Tower of Babel. So the historicity of the Genesis stories is rather cemented in the Book of Mormon. And I think that is something that makes conservative Mormonism rather similar to conservative traditional Catholicism. The second way in which Mormons and trad Catholics are similar is that they both place a strong emphasis on culture. Now, I did title this video, and I even just said it right now, ways in which trad Catholics and Mormons are similar, but maybe I would do better to say that this is a way in which trad Catholics wish they were more similar with their Mormon cousins. It's no secret that Mormon culture is It's a real thing, right? The play about the Book of Mormon is evidence to that effect. The ways in which there seem to be cultural Mormons who don't hold to a very literal view of their faith. I'm thinking about scholars like Dr. Dan McClellan. Makes me think that Mormons are somehow more mature in the evolution of their religion into something more akin to culture, as in Mormonism is somehow closer to Judaism than Catholicism is on this front, where there is such a strong culture that people who no longer believe still have almost no choice but to say, I'm still part of this culture because this is how I was raised. And, I make this point with trad Catholics a lot too, where it's like, I will never not be trad Catholic by culture. I can't change the way that I was raised. But I guess there's just not nearly enough of us, right, to actually have like the same kind of culture that Mormons do. But regardless, that Mormon culture is there, and trad Catholics want that culture to be there, and in some places that culture is there. So for an example of what I mean by Catholics wanting to build that culture, let me play a clip from Brian Holdsworth's most recent appearance on Pints with Aquinas.
I think serious Catholics need to find a bubble and go and live in that bubble.
Yeah.
Because it's just a wasteland everywhere else.
But nonetheless, they have this impression of what that means. Like, we all want to build Amish communes or something like that. And it's like,
It's
no.
like, yes, but that's not exactly what we mean.
No, but even like, look at what the apostles were doing, right? Like, they weren't just like living out in the world.
Right.
They went out into the world and did missionary activity, and then they came back to their communities where they were living very insulated. Yes. At the end of the day, where they had
and I can only speak from my experience in Steubenville because I don't live in these other wonderful Catholic towns, but that's what it's like here.
Did you hear that? They talk about needing to retreat and build a bubble. What they're talking about is a Catholic Salt Lake City, Utah. In some ways, this already exists, and it exists for the trads in St. Mary's, Kansas, which is kind of like, trad Catholic Mecca, I guess, for the SSPX anyway. And it exists for conservative, less trad Catholics, I guess, in Ohio, right, in Steubenville. And I think that trad Catholics' desire for a insular community is very similar to the Mormon desire for an insular community, but the Mormons are just, I guess, better at it. And, who knows? Maybe we will see Catholics kind of turn into the Mormon church, in as much as like there are very few of them actually left, but those that are left tend to congregate in their own Salt Lake City, and they send out missionaries into like the secular world and try to get converts that way. Perhaps, who knows? But I do think that is an interesting emphasis on culture. And I guess like as a tangent to the culture too is Mormons are famous for shunning. Catholics do this too. Trad Catholics do this too. Now, the name isn't there, but I think that my story alone speaks to that somewhat. I was told in no uncertain terms that I am not to speak to my siblings about anything that like happened to me. And that, that it felt like shunning to me. And I know that I'm not alone here. I know that there are other people who grew up trad who have similar experiences and indeed worse experiences than I did. And so if you told me that there is no shunning in trad culture, I'd probably look at you a little bit funny. I think that shunning is kind of just a natural byproduct of having an insular culture. Trad Catholicism has an insular culture to some degree. Perhaps not to the same degree as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but it is there to some degree, and that is another reason why Mormonism and trad Catholicism are similar. Third, and this one might actually apply more to like regular Roman Catholicism than it does to trad Catholicism in particular, but the Mormon Church is like a real political force, an actual organization, just like the Catholic Church. There's a really interesting article on Wikipedia, and the Wikipedia list, it just says the list of the wealthiest religious organizations. It's right here on the screen now, and you can see that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is actually number 2 on this list, right after some kind of Hindu religion that apparently is worth, I guess, $1,200 billion, which I think is wild. I had no idea that there was like some kind of Hindu temple that was worth that much money. But in the second position comes the Mormon Church, which is estimated to have a net worth of $200 billion. Like, that is wild that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has $200 billion. Now, interestingly, if you go all the way down to the Vatican here at the bottom, it actually says that the worth of the Vatican is unknown. Now, I did Google just how much money does the Catholic Church have, and in fact, we can actually Google that right now. Let me just do how much money does the Catholic Church have right here, and I'll probably have to move the screen a little bit, but there you go. So apparently, the church only actually has about $5 billion. Now, that's according to the Holy See's financial statements for 2021, and I'm positive that the financial statements that the Vatican puts out is not the entire amount of money that the Vatican has. So much of the Vatican's wealth is going to be stored up in like things that kind of don't have a price, right? Like, how much is the Sistine Chapel worth, right? How do you put a price tag on that? So I'm sure that the Vatican has a lot more than $5 billion, but does the Catholic Church have $200 billion? I don't know, right? I just don't know. And what's interesting too is that like Opus Dei, and it says part of the Catholic Church, has 2.8 billion. So that is interesting that Opus Dei alone has 2.8 billion and the Vatican is listed as unknown. But still, the fact that the Mormon Church has $200 billion, that probably makes it close to, if not more than, the amount of money that the Catholic Church has. And with that amount of money comes political prowess. It's probable that the LDS Church affects politics in the United States, at least in Utah, more than the Catholic Church does. I'm not positive how much sway the Catholic Church has on U.S. politics. I know there's more Catholics in the U.S. than there are Mormons, but I think Mormons are just more swayed by their church than the general Catholic voting population is swayed by the Catholic Church. So I'm not entirely sure what to make of that, but just the fact that both are just such big forces in the world of like politics, I think is just another reason why the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is quite similar to the Catholic Church. And obviously, the ways that the two churches are different outweigh the ways in which they're similar. Don't get me wrong. But I found myself being very attracted to all of these ex-Mormon podcasts because the experience of the ex-Mormon seems more similar to my experience than the experience of other ex-Catholics who were not traditional. And so, you know, I do think that the similarities between Mormonism and traditional Catholicism, I don't think I'm the first person to notice this. And I just thought it would be kind of interesting for me to make a video about it, especially since the Mormon missionaries keep coming back to my house every week, which I asked, you know, I'm totally cool with, by the way, and I hope they continue to. If you're interested in getting my thoughts on some Mormon apologetics, and then I guess also just like scholarship about the Book of Mormon, I'm totally happy to make a video about that. But I know that this channel is mostly about Catholicism and traditional Catholicism at that. So this was just something that was kind of on my mind that I wanted to make a short video about. Thanks for humoring me with this rather off-topic video. If you want more things like this, you know, I'm happy to do it. Let's talk about it in the comments down below if you're interested in, like, you know, hearing my reasons why I think that Mormonism is more false than Catholicism, if that makes sense. Perhaps I'm biased because I grew up Catholic, but if you're interested in hearing my thoughts there, I'd be happy to share them. But until then, thanks everyone.